Hi everyone, good morning or good afternoon or evening, wherever you're joining us today. Welcome to our TEFL.org webinar. Today we're going to be talking about teaching English in South Korea and specifically our new teaching placements in South Korea. So just to introduce myself, I'm Alan. I'm going to be today's webinar host, and I'll be joined by one of our very special guests in a couple of minutes. But just to give you a bit of information about me, I've been working at the TEFL.org for almost 10 years now. I work in the sales and marketing team, and before joining the TEFL.org, I used to be a TEFL teacher myself. I used to teach English in Spain. But getting back to the topic of today's webinar, if you've got any questions about teaching English in South Korea or our new teaching placements, just drop them in the comment section of the platform that you're using. So it'll be either on the right hand side of your screen or just down at the bottom. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and Facebook pages. That way you'll be notified of when our next upcoming webinars will be. So the run through of this webinar, we're just going to be covering most of the sort of common FAQs that we get about our new teaching placements in South Korea. So we're going to go through the requirements for applicants, what you can expect in terms of benefits and on top of your salary, what a typical day in the life looks like for a TEFL teacher in South Korea, and also what it's like teaching abroad at the moment during COVID-19. So yeah, if you've got any questions, drop them in the comment section and we'll get to them at the end of this webinar. So we're expecting the webinar to run maybe about 40 to 50 minutes. But yeah, just drop your questions in at any time and we'll get through to them. So without further ado, I'll just add our very special guest. And today, yeah, we're joined by Enzo. Hi, Enzo.
Hi, Alan.
Hi, thanks for joining us today. Enzo is part of our in-country team in South Korea. Do you want to tell us a bit about yourself, where you're based?
Yeah, sure. So, as you can see, I'm very cold at the moment. I'm actually based here in South Korea, on the ground, supporting and helping all the teachers that come through and do the South Korea program. I'm originally from South Africa, and I've actually myself been a teacher here in South Korea. So I came through a program similar to this, and I came over and I taught English for 3 years in South Korea. And then I've been working as part of the on-the-ground team for about another 3 years as well. So I've been living in South Korea for about a total of 6 years on both sides. So I've done the teaching and I've also been, helping and assisting, new teachers come over and experience the same things that I've been experiencing too.
Fantastic. That's great. So yeah, a bit about the program. We just launched the program just a couple of weeks ago, just back in January, and we've had a lot of interest about applying for work in Korea at the moment. So yeah, what we'll do is we'll go through one of the most common questions that we get is the eligibility criteria to work in South Korea. Can you sort of take us through a bit about the requirements for applicants?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things about the South Korean program is that the visa that you need to get does have quite strict eligibility requirements. So just to kind of run through those, first of all, you have to be a citizen and a passport holder of one of the 7 qualifying countries that Korea accepts for this E2 instructor visa. Those countries are the USA and Canada, the UK and Ireland, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, and I think that's everybody. I think that's 7.
The 7.
Well, I know the UK is not one country, but the UK as a group is considered, one of the groups. So you would have to be a passport holder and a citizen of one of those countries. You would also have to have a bachelor's degree or higher. Unfortunately, like just a normal diploma or something like that wouldn't be accepted for this visa. It does have to be a bachelor's degree. And that degree also has to come from a university in one of those 7 countries. So it doesn't have to be the same country. So for example, if you're a US citizen, but you studied in the UK, that's perfectly fine. Just unfortunately, if you've studied at a university outside one of those 7 countries, that university degree wouldn't be accepted for your visa. The next thing that you would need is a clean criminal background check. So it has to be a national level check, and it has to be 100% clean. If there's anything on there, even if it's a misdemeanor from your youth or something like that, unfortunately, that will mean that your visa would be declined or denied by immigration. So those are kind of the 3 main points, main criteria. Now there are other slight things that we do have to take into account. Things like health status and medical conditions, tattoos or piercings, and also accent and fluency. Those kind of things come in and are kind of we take a look at them and we do them case by case. And then the last one would just be age. So usually we accept teachers anywhere from 21 to about 35 or 40. Sometimes we do take, we would consider teachers slightly older if you have good experience or good qualifications. But as a standard, age range of the program, that's what we would be looking at. So those are kind of the standard ones. The most important ones are obviously just being a passport holder and a citizen with a bachelor's degree and a clean criminal background check. And then the other points, we would address case by case.
Fantastic. Thanks for going through that. So in terms of other sort of desirable qualities for applicants, obviously we provide the TEFL training before applicants go out to South Korea to teach. So included in the teaching program, we include our 120-hour online course. So that's the most popular course and a requirement for not just South Korea, but for teaching all over the world. So that covers everything from teaching methodology, classroom management, teaching grammar, new vocabulary, teaching different skills, video observation, all of those great things. In terms of experience, do applicants need any sort of prior experience with young learners or adults, or is it open to newly qualified teachers?
Yeah, so thanks for bringing up the TEFL or the TESL. It's actually something I forgot to mention, but that is also a requirement of the program. So you don't have to be a qualified teacher, but you do have to have a TEFL or a TESL qualification. Other desirable qualities would also just be, I guess if someone is a qualified teacher with a teaching degree or a PGCE certificate. But beyond that, you don't need any experience, you don't need any teaching experience. You don't specifically need a qualification besides a TEFL or a TESL. So, it's open to any university graduates. As long as you've got a degree and you've got a TESL, that would be perfectly fine.
Fantastic. Yeah. So it's a great stepping stone if you're just getting into TEFL and this is going to be your first teaching position abroad. In terms of the application process, applications are open year-round, aren't they? So in terms of the sort of process when someone signs up and applies for the role, do you want to take us through sort of what that sort of looked like in terms of what's required and also timeframes as well?
Yeah, sure. So the Teaching in South Korea program, it kind of takes 2 kind of channels or 2 routes. You either get the private school or the language academy route, or you get the public school route. Now, the process and stuff does differ slightly for both of these different programs. So, for example, with public schools in the government system, the program that we work with is called EPIC. And EPIC has 2 main intakes per year. So one is in spring, which is in March. So March 1st would be the intake start date. And then the second one is in the autumn, and that's a September 1st start date. Now, that's the start date, but the document collection process and time from sign up to arriving in Korea is quite long. So all the documents you have to get legalized, and there's certain processes to follow. And applications open about 6 to 7 months in advance for those public school intakes. So if public school is a route that you're interested in, the sooner that you can apply with that intake in mind, the more advantageous it is for you. Get an application in early, start working on your documents early, and get your placement sorted out. With private schools, however, so the language centers and the language academies, whilst there are peak and lower hiring seasons, there are pretty much placements year round. I would say the only kind of exception would be maybe 2 or 3 months where it's like winter holidays, summer holidays. But beyond that, there's placements year round. And from start to finish, there are lots of factors involved. The main one just being how long it takes to collect documents. If a teacher is super good with their documents and collects everything quickly, you're probably looking at about 3 to 4 months from the day you sign up until the day you're on the plane arriving in Korea. If it's a little bit longer, or if you're applying to a public school intake where there's a specific date, it might be a little longer, maybe 4 to 6 months. So unfortunately, it's not a sign up, here's my documents, I'm going next week kind of thing. It is quite a long process. But that's what we're there for. That's what we're going to do, and help you and guide you and make sure everything's done correctly and check all your documents and just make sure that you have some support throughout the entire process.
Fantastic. So, for example, if someone wanted to sign up after today's webinar, they could potentially be teaching in sort of Seoul or Daegu in sort of maybe July, August time. Is that sort of roughly?
Yes. So July is usually around summer vacation time. So that's when they tend to get a little bit quiet. So I would say from about August onwards, going into that second semester. So the first semester and the start of the school year is coming up now on March 1st. And then the second semester will start following the summer break on September 1st. So usually they would have teachers arriving mid to early August, do maybe a bit of training, do quarantining if quarantining is still a thing, and then be ready to start on September 1st. But, if the school's hiring earlier, or if the teachers get the documents done super quickly, there's always a possibility to get a placement before that time, maybe around May or June, if everything's on track.
Fantastic. That's great. I can see a ton of questions coming in already from Robin, Leah, Cyan, Forrest. We'll get to those in a couple of minutes. So that's the sort of eligibility criteria covered, and also the application process. In terms of the working in South Korea as an English language teacher, obviously this program is paid, so teachers receive a monthly salary, which is a great starting salary for anyone getting into teaching. On top of that, what are the other sort of benefits that applicants can expect on the program as well?
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the reasons why the career program is really attractive is because the benefits are really great if you do compare it to other countries. So whilst the entry requirements and the eligibility criteria are maybe a little bit more stringent, the benefits that you would receive are really great. So in terms of salary, your average starting salary in South Korea is from about 2.1 to 2.3 million Korean won, which is about 1,700 to 1,900 US dollars. And in euro, I don't know, maybe what's that, 1,500 to 1,700 ish. I don't know what exactly the exchange rate is at the moment, but yeah, so that's your ballpark figure in terms of salary. Some of the other inclusions in that would be you get an apartment, which will be semi-furnished and pretty much ready to live in. So you're not going to be paying any kind of rental fees or anything like that. You also receive flight reimbursement. It does differ slightly from public school to private school, but at minimum, you will at least get your a contribution towards your flight arriving to Korea. And then you will also get a severance check at the end of your 1-year contract. And a severance check is just basically like a 13th check. So for every 1-year contract that you complete, you get a bonus month salary, and that rolls over year on year. So if you stay for 3 years, for example, you'll get 3 months of salary at the end of that period, and when you decide to leave and go home. So those are really the kind of major benefits, and those are across private schools and public schools. Some of the other benefits are you get signed up to health insurance, and the schools pay 50% of your insurance premiums. You get signed up for pension, and again, the school will pay half and you'll pay half. You also get it's Mondays to Fridays, so there's no weekend work unless there's a special event or some catch-up classes or something like that. It's Monday to Friday. And then you also get paid vacation on top of public holidays too. So it does differ again slightly public schools to private schools, but you get paid vacation, you get public holidays, as well as all those other things that I mentioned.
Fantastic. Yeah, that sounds brilliant.
So
in terms of the teaching placements, when teachers are actually in South Korea, you were saying about both opportunities to teach in public and private language schools. What sort of would English language teachers expect in terms of student ages, levels, sort of hours of work?
Cool. So both public schools and private schools, your age groups are going to be usually kindergarten, elementary, and sometimes into middle school. Usually high school and older students, they go to more focused type cram schools or somewhere where there's, maybe qualified teachers or Korean teachers because they're studying for specific exams and university exams and stuff. So the schools and stuff that we work with, and the majority of the TEFL industry in South Korea is based towards slightly younger learners. So with private schools, I would say a majority of positions are kindy and elementary. There are some schools that do elementary and middle school, but I would say the majority, about 70% of positions, are with the slightly younger kids. So you'd have kindergarten kids in the morning, you'd have a lunch break, and then you'd have your elementary kids in the afternoon. There, your work hours would be about 9 until 6. If you're teaching older kids, it's usually around 1 until 9 or 2 until 10. You'll wait for them to finish school and then come over. And then your work week, it's a 40-hour work week. And there's usually around 30 teaching hours in your 40 hours. So about 6 hours of teaching a day, a 1 hour lunch break, and then about 2 hours for your lesson planning and prepping and admin reports, whatever else it is that you need to do. So that's with private schools. With public schools, it's also Monday to Friday. But because you're working at a public school, your hours are going to be about 8:30 until 4:30. Here, it depends at the school that you've been assigned to. So usually you'd be working at more than one school. So you'd have your main school, which would be your base. And then you might have one or two smaller schools that you travel to once or twice a week, and you would be the teacher there as well. Majority of positions there are in elementary schools, so 3rd grade until 6th grade, sometimes middle schools, but there would be no kindergarten. And there you would be teaching about 22 to 23 hours per week. And then the rest of the time would be for lesson planning and stuff. And yeah, I think that pretty much covers it. Day in the life.
Brilliant. Fantastic. And outside teaching,
Mm-hmm.
what's it like? It depends where you're based in South Korea, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But what's it like for a TEFL teacher outside the classroom? So what sort of can you expect when you're not teaching in terms of travel or meeting up with other teachers or those sorts of things?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, obviously in Korea, it's a pretty small country, but there's quite a big population. So, loads and loads of big cities all over the place. I know that Seoul is usually the place that most people are familiar with. But, so there's so many big and large and diverse cities. Daegu is one, which is centrally located. Busan in the south, which is a big coastal city and a personal favorite of mine. Then you have Incheon, which is where we're based and where the airport is, just west of Seoul, and loads of other, great cities all over the country. So, Seoul city center itself can be a little bit tricky for a first-time teacher. In the middle of the big city, schools are looking for experienced teachers and stuff like that. So it's not impossible, but it can be a little bit more difficult. But definitely the greater Seoul area, or pretty much across the entire country, we do have placement options. So depending on what you would prefer or where you would prefer to go, we can always try and match those preferences. There are lots of factors involved in placement, so unfortunately we can never guarantee it 100%, but we would definitely work towards trying to match teacher location preferences as possible. With private schools, you're introduced to a school and a location beforehand, so you do know the school and the details of the school when you're going to interview with them. But with public schools, it's a bit more of a, I guess, kind of like a lottery system. So you would be accepted into the program. You would then be assigned to a specific education office in a specific province. And then you would only find out about your school and your location once you arrive and you go to orientation. So you'd know kind of where you're going when you arrive, but you'll only know exactly where you're going at the end of your orientation.
Yeah, that sounds kind of familiar to what my experience was like in Spain. So I applied months in advance, and I think it was maybe like 2 or 3 weeks before I actually left the UK, where I found out what school I was going to go to and who I was going to be
Right.
teaching. And
Yeah.
I'd never heard of the city before, but it was a fantastic experience. I think it was better than going to one of the bigger sort of main sort of well-known cities, because I got sort of like the real life experience of living in Spain. And I'm guessing that's the same in South Korea as well. You sort of get off the sort of beaten track, the sort of tourist track.
Yeah, so my placement was actually like that. I went with public schools. I didn't really know where I was going until I arrived, and I was placed in, I wouldn't say rural, but a smaller city. Now, I know a lot of people that's quite nerve-wracking or intimidating, but I found it was really awesome because I became part of the community. Everybody knew teacher Enzo, almost like a bit of a local celebrity in my city. Whereas if you go into Seoul or one of the bigger cities, it's an awesome and an amazing experience, but you just kind of blend into the city a little bit more. So obviously it depends on the experience that you as a teacher would like to have, but definitely don't be afraid of the smaller locations. It's a more real experience, as you mentioned, and can be more enjoyable too.
Fantastic. That's great. And also sort of like the hot topic of conversation at the moment, or something that we've always got to consider right now, is the situation with COVID. So what's it like living in a foreign country, and also traveling, international travel? So what are the sort of requirements for applicants to consider before going to Korea, and also when they're in Korea as well? Sort of what are what's the situation like that on the ground?
Cool. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm probably perfectly placed to answer that because I actually just returned 2 weeks ago from international travel. So I've been through quarantine and everything myself. Basically, the first thing I can say is that I'm very glad I got stuck here during COVID and nowhere else, just because the COVID response in Korea has been excellent and the way that they've dealt with it. So, at the beginning, obviously, Korea was the second kind of hotspot for COVID beyond, after China once they had their outbreak, but they addressed it very quickly and they implemented some good policies and they brought the numbers down and they got it under control. They've had a very strong vaccination plan, and I think we're at about 80 or 90% of the adult population fully vaccinated. They're even busy rolling out third and in some situations fourth shots to those who are super high risk. So very good on the terms of vaccinations. The numbers in Korea have spiked a lot in the last 2 weeks. So we're up to about 90,000 a day, whereas the previous biggest we had was about 7 or 8,000 around about January. But this is kind of like, I like to kind of compare it to a controlled burn, if that makes sense. So the government's almost letting it happen a little bit now that everyone's vaccinated and there's, they claim Omicron is less dangerous. It looks like it's so, but it seems like this is the point that they've chosen to let it happen. So it's kind of controlled, and whilst the numbers are high, the government's still looking at relaxing some of the other restrictions and getting back to normal life. So on that side of things, the numbers aren't too scary. They're high, but they're not super. They're not going to be, locking down or anything like that. Now, Korea has remained open throughout the entire pandemic. They never once shut their borders down to international travel. There has been small blips where they stopped issuing visas for the UK and for South Africa for a couple of weeks when I think it was Delta or the version just before Delta broke out. But it was only a month or two, and then things fully resumed. So, throughout the entire, duration of COVID, South Korea's been open, and we've brought teachers basically every month into the country since everything started. So the country's open. The only thing you have to bear in mind is that you would have to go into quarantine when you arrive. This can be done, though, at your own apartment if you're at a private school. Public schools do it a little differently because they've got a couple hundred teachers coming in at a time. They organize hotels and they do it at a hotel. But if you're coming up with private schools, you can do it in your own apartment. We get the schools to help you out with some shopping and some supplies, so you've got what you need in your apartment. It's currently at 7 days, so it's not the terrible 14 days anymore that it used to be. So it's just 1 week. It's nice. You get over your jet lag, do a bit of studying or catch up, whatever you want. We do culture courses and we do events and we do stuff that we'd invite you to too. And then once you're done with your 7 days, you'd go out and start teaching as normal. Now, in terms of on the ground, there are some social distancing measures in place, like limits on gatherings. There's business operation hour curfews, so everything has to shut at 9 p.m. Now, you don't have to be at home at 9 p.m., but everything just stops operating at 9. They are talking about relaxing that a little bit from next week onwards, so we'll probably hear tomorrow what exactly is going to happen there. And there are there's a vaccine pass system in place as well. But you can get your vaccine from abroad registered in Korea once you arrive, and then you can get a temporary pass to use until you get your ID card, which takes about a month, and then you can register on the Korean system with the Korean app and everything. So obviously there are some considerations to take into account, but everything's, I guess, as good as it can be for international travel and quarantine teaching. It's all in-class teaching. There's no online teaching, and everything's kind of carrying on as normal.
Fantastic. That sounds great. Perfect. Well, we've actually got, there's a ton of questions that have come through. So what we'll do is we'll just go through those. I think that's most of the FAQs that we've covered in terms of applications, entry
Mm-hmm.
requirements and what it's like day to day. Yeah, we've
Mm-hmm.
got a question here from Leah. She's saying, can you only teach with this specific visa? So I think at the very beginning, we were talking about the requirements for the visa to teach in English in South Korea. So is it that specific? Is that the E2 visa that
That's
you're
correct. There's
referring
only one visa for English teachers, and it's an E2 visa. The only other visas that would allow you to teach would be long-term residency visas or marriage visas, something along those lines. But to come to Korea to teach English, that's the only option that you have. It's a government-issued English language instructor visa, specific for teaching English.
Perfect, that's great. And another question about eligibility for visas. Do you know
Sure.
if the Open University in the UK is that eligible for a visa? So that's one that you can do distance learning in the UK.
Yeah, so we have had some queries about the Open University recently because I've seen a lot more people have started doing it. I know it is UK based, and as part of the visa process, you have to get a photocopy of your degree notarized and apostilled. Now, with the Open University, it's UK based, and I think it is accredited, so you can get it notarized and apostilled.
Mhm.
Some schools are a little hesitant to hire teachers with Open University degrees, just because it's not an in-person degree and it's all online based. But for visa and legal requirements, it is accepted. So you may just have to be a little more patient through the placement process, but we should definitely be able to help you get a placement.
Fantastic, that's great. And we've got one about application deadlines here from Seba. Can we apply to start in August 2022 if we graduate in July? So in
So that's
terms of
cutting it
getting
a
all
little
the
bit,
documents,
getting
sorry.
everything ready. No problem. So that is cutting it a little bit fine. And the reason why I say that is once you get your degree, you have to get the physical version. You then have to make a photocopy of it, and you have to have that first notarized by a notary public or a solicitor. You then have to send it to get apostilled by your country's whoever apostilled documents in your country. I think the UK is the FCO. USA would be the Secretary of State office or something like that. Those processes can take a couple days up to a week or two. And then once you've got a job, so once your documents are finished, we start with placement. Placement can take a month or so to get a job. And once you get a job, you're looking at about 4 to 5 weeks for the visa process, just for the visa process in terms of submitting documents and stuff. So I think if you were going to get if you're going to graduate and get your degree in July, you're probably looking at coming around September, October.
Okay.
It just depends when you get the physical parchment and when you can get a copy of it notarized and possible. Now, if you can get a version sooner than your graduation, great. We can get started earlier. It just depends when you get that physical document.
Fantastic. And we've got one here from Flores on YouTube. In regards of health, does the program require teachers to get boosters or be vaccinated?
So for the program itself, we do require teachers to be vaccinated. And the main reason for that is that a school is pretty much guaranteed not to hire a teacher who's unvaccinated, just because of the risks involved and the way that the vaccine policy and stuff happens in Korea. And another thing to note on vaccines is that Korea has a validity period of 6 months on vaccines. So even if you're double vaccinated, if you're beyond 6 months from your 6th shot, a bit of a tongue twister, then you're considered unvaccinated and you would need to get a booster shot to be able to use the vaccine pass and go to restaurants and cafes and stuff like that. So it's always best to try and do that back at home if you can. And then, you can get registered in Korea on the system, as I mentioned before.
Fantastic. Sorry, I missed this one earlier from Alex about degrees. Does it matter if your degrees are 2-1, a 2-2, or a third?
Cool. So for private schools, no, it doesn't. Private schools will take any bachelor's degrees. Public schools, however, they do look at GPA. Now, my knowledge of GPA is not the best because there's so many different types or whatever, but it's usually if you have about a 60% percentile and higher, you should be fine. Sometimes I'll go to 55, between 55 and 60, but usually 60 and up is preferred for public schools. So I'm from South Africa, so our GPA is a little bit different. We work on a percentile, but that's kind of usually how the system works in terms of percentages if you do a calculator.
Okay, great. And in terms of sort of your first week in Korea, I know that you were saying that you've got like an orientation, you've got some classes those sorts of things. In terms of teaching, would you be able to sort of shadow? I can imagine it depends on the school and what sort of resource they have available, but would you be able to shadow a teacher first before teaching your own class?
Yeah, so this definitely depends on public versus private school, and it also depends on each individual school. The schools are run individually, and they will have slightly different processes. So, if you're going for public schools, what will happen is you'll arrive. At the moment, you go into quarantine. Once quarantine is done, you then have a epic program orientation where it's 1 week of classes and presentations and getting to know stuff. And then once you're done, you move over to your placement school, and then the schools sometimes will do a bit of shadowing and stuff like that. But in public schools, you do have a co-teacher with you. So you kind of learn with the co-teacher, teach with the co-teacher, and they help you to kind of, find your feet and get going. With private schools, again, you would arrive, you do your 1 week of quarantine. In some cases, they would have you shadowing and watching classes via Skype or something, whilst you're in quarantine. Some schools may just leave you to it and let you relax and get through things. And then, the schools will differ. So some schools would expect you to hit the ground running and start teaching from day one or day two. Probably not day one, but, at least from the start. Some would have a bit of shadowing for you to do. Some would run full training sessions. It really just depends on the schools. But in most cases, in most situations, you would have some kind of training or shadowing or introduction or orientation.
Fantastic, yeah. And included in the course as well, we've got a module that's dedicated to video observation. So you've actually got a chance to observe a qualified teacher delivering a couple of different types of classes. But yeah, when you're on the ground, normally someone at the school will be able to assist you if you do need help as well. In terms of...
that's what we're there for as well. So the on-the-ground team, if you have questions, if you're struggling, we do regular webinars. We have a team that's, dedicated to help answer questions. We can have a chat and guide you through that kind of stuff. So, even if you are struggling to find your feet a little bit, you are fully supported, and would be able to have a call and have a chat and get you sorted out.
Fantastic. And in terms of Korean language skills itself, obviously you won't be speaking Korean in the classroom, but what's it like? What are the requirements for what sort of your expected level of
so
Korean?
For teaching in Korea, there is no expected level. You don't have to speak any Korean. Now, I would say from personal experience, learning some Korean definitely helps your day-to-day life, navigating around, reading restaurant menus, speaking to taxi drivers, because despite the emphasis on English language learning, the actual language ability of the local Korean people isn't always that high. So on a personal level, I would definitely recommend it. And as part of the program, we do also offer 1 month free Korean language classes, online language classes. But for actually signing up and teaching and being eligible for the program, you don't need any prior Korean language knowledge.
Fantastic. That's great. And you've also got, as well, beyond that month, you've got apps like Duolingo. And there's tons of translation apps as well that you can use, that you can scan images and it'll translate for you if you're reading menus, those sorts of things. There's a question here about about visas again. If you're eligible for a visa, can your wife get a visa to join you too? So that could also... We do have a lot of people asking about if their sort of partner or their friend, they can get placed with a friend. What would be the sort of situation there?
Yeah, so if you're both planning on signing up and coming over as teachers, that's absolutely no problem. We do often get couple positions. Now, couple positions, the preference for the school always goes to married couples. We have been successful though in placing dating couples. The main risk factor there for the school is that, something happens, or if a couple breaks up or something, obviously that's a big issue for the school. But it's not to say it's impossible. We have definitely been successful in doing it. And if your friends, certainly if there's 2 positions at the same school, we can try and set that up. Otherwise, we can try and find you 2 positions in the same general area or city. The only thing on that side of things is that obviously finding a couple's position is your main preference. So if that's the case, then age group and language preferences kind of have to take a back seat, because we need to, that's going to be the focus for you for placement, is to try and find a position at the same school. If your wife or whoever is coming across as like a dependent and is not going to be teaching, unfortunately, that's not really something we can accommodate, just because of, the school having to worry about someone who's not coming over as a teacher or as a dependent or something like that. So as part of this program, unfortunately, we can't accept that. But if you're both looking at coming over and applying for the visa and teaching together, that's perfectly fine.
Fantastic. And in terms of the interview process with schools, what's it like in terms of what they need to sort of prepare in advance, or what is the sort of situation with documents,
Mm-hmm.
CVs,
Mm-hmm.
volume of or number of interviews?
Yeah, so that's what we're here for, and that's what we'll prepare you for. So we'll go through the entire document collection process. Once that's done, we will then introduce you to the placement team, who will then start working on placement for you. And we will also offer you the opportunity for mock interviews. We send out an interview tip sheet, and we do help to prepare you for those interviews, and we'll guide you through them. We'll let you know what to expect, what kind of questions are asked, all that kind of stuff. So it's definitely part of the program and part of the process, and what we do to help you.
Fantastic. That's great. And I think we've just got one more question here about I can't find it now. Now that I'm looking for it, it was just about age limitations for the application. So you were saying it's normally between sort of 21, so that would be when after someone's graduated, obviously, for a 3-year degree. And then in terms of like upper age limits for applicants,
Upper age limits. Yeah, we're looking at around 35 to 40. If there's someone who's older and they would like to apply, we can certainly take a look at your application. And if you are a strong, teacher applicant, we can try look at accepting you. We would have to just double check that with the placement team first, just to make sure that they're happy with the criteria and that they're confident they can place you. And usually for those who are, slightly older and looking at applying, you would need some kind of teaching experience or teaching qualification beyond a TEFL to be able to be eligible.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks.
Yeah.
And there was another question, but I can't seem to find it. It was about what you were saying about the sort of renewable teaching contract. So in essence, could you be in teaching in Korea sort of like on a longer term basis? So once you've sort of taught there for a year and like teaching in South Korea, is it something that you could actually make a career of and just stay in Korea teaching?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's no end date to the program. One of the kind of benefits of the program that we do offer is lifetime placement. So if you want continued placement in Korea, we would continue to offer you placements with other schools. As long as you're here and you're teaching and you've got good experience, you can carry on going pretty much as long as you want, basically. There's a ton of people who have made a career out of it or made a life out of it, and have taught for, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and they're still here and still loving it. So you do have to commit to a 12-month contract for the program to be accepted into the program. That's for your 1-year contract, because the visas and the contracts are 1 year. But you can then, from there, carry on renewing at your same school if you're happy, or if you wanted to try a new school, a different city, or a different program between public and private schools, we can help you out with finding, additional placements and switching over and switching around and moving around.
Fantastic. And like you were saying as well, you've got that sort of 13th pay at the end of that contract as well. So that's also a good bonus to have at the end.
Yeah, and that keeps rolling over for every year.
Yeah. Fantastic. That's brilliant. I think that's pretty much all the questions that we've been asked. But yeah, as always, if you're watching the recap, you can still comment and ask questions, and one of our team will get back to you ASAP. But as we were saying, all the placements are open for applications. So if you want to apply for teaching English in South Korea, you can do it now and be teaching English by the end of this year.
Yeah, that sounds good. They definitely can.
Brilliant. Well, yeah, thanks again, Enzo, for joining us. Yeah, have a good day, and have a good day, everyone else, all the viewers, and catch you next time on our latest webinar.
Thanks,
Cool.
everyone.
Thanks again. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.